I never wanted anything from Tate Mercer. Not his money, not his attention, not the way he looked at me like I was a problem he hadn't figured out yet. I made that clear from the very first night. What I didn't realize was that telling a man like him no, and meaning it, wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. If you're new here, subscribe, leave a like, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. Now get comfortable, because this one doesn't let go. I've been living in New York for 4 years, and I still don't feel like it belongs to me. Some people arrive in this city and immediately know how to move through it, like they were built for the noise, the pace, the way strangers brush past you without apology. I've never been that person. I take the long way to avoid crowded subway cars. I eat lunch alone at my desk more often than I'd like to admit. I love my work, genuinely. There's something that feels close to peace when I'm behind a lens, framing a shot, waiting for the light to shift just right. But outside of that, my life has been quietly shrinking for months, and I haven't known how to stop it. My last relationship ended 14 months ago. He wasn't a bad person. He just had a way of making me feel like everything I did, every decision, every dollar I spent, every opportunity I chased, needed his approval first. By the time I left, I had forgotten what it felt like to want something just for myself. So I've been careful since then. Careful about who I let close. Careful about accepting help. Careful about men who offer things before you've asked. It's not bitterness. It's just that I know how that story goes, and I'm not interested in reading it again. The night I met Tate Mercer, I wasn't thinking about any of that. I was thinking about a parking spot, and a deadline, and the fact that my GPS had taken me down a street that was barely wide enough for one car. It was a Sunday, almost 10 at night, and the rental I'd picked up for a weekend shoot in the West Village was making a sound it shouldn't have been making. I was reversing, slowly, carefully, and then the sound of impact. Not loud, but definite. I sat still for a second before I got out. The car I'd hit was dark, expensive looking, parked just slightly beyond where the streetlight reached. A man was already outside, standing with his hands in his coat pockets, looking at the damage with an expression that was completely unreadable. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't pulling out his phone. He was just watching me walk toward him, like he was waiting to see what I'd do next. I got there first. I looked at the scratch on his bumper, then at him, and said, "I'll cover my side. You cover yours." He didn't answer right away, just looked at me with something I couldn't quite place. Not anger, not amusement, something quieter than both. Then he said, "You don't even know what that car costs." "Doesn't matter," I said. "It's my damage." He studied me for a moment longer than felt comfortable, and then, almost to himself, he said, "Okay." I didn't think about him again that night, or at least, I told myself I didn't. The show was supposed to be small. That's what my friend Dana kept saying when she convinced me to submit 3 pieces. "It's low pressure, Zoe. It's a neighborhood gallery. Nobody important goes to these things." I believed her because I needed to. Putting my work on a wall for strangers to look at is the kind of thing that makes me want to cancel the morning of, and I almost did. But I'd spent 6 weeks selecting the photos, printing them, framing them myself. So I showed up, in the black dress I'd had since before the breakup, with a glass of wine I was holding more for something to do with my hands than because I wanted to drink it. The gallery was narrow and warm, the kind of place that smells like old wood and fresh paint. Maybe 40 people. Soft music. Dana found me immediately and squeezed my arm and said my section looked incredible. And I smiled and thanked her and spent the next 20 minutes standing slightly apart from my own work, watching strangers look at it. Most people passed quickly. A few stopped. One woman stood in front of my largest print for almost a full minute, and I felt something loosen in my chest watching her. Then I noticed him. He was standing at the far end of my section, in front of the last photograph, a shot I almost didn't include. It was taken the night of the car accident, maybe 10 minutes after we'd exchanged information and gone our separate ways. I'd been sitting in the rental, engine off, and I'd looked out the window and seen a man standing alone on the sidewalk, back to me, hands in his coat pockets, just standing there in the dark, like he had nowhere to be and no hurry to get there. I'd picked up my camera without thinking. The photo was quiet, a little melancholy. I'd titled it, Still. I hadn't recognized him when I submitted it. I recognized him now. He was wearing a different coat, darker, and his hair was slightly longer than I remembered, but it was him, unmistakably. He was reading the small card beside the frame, title, photographer name, price. And something about the stillness of him in that moment mirrored the photo so precisely that it almost made me laugh. Almost. Instead, I walked over, because standing across the room pretending I hadn't noticed seemed worse. I stopped beside him and kept my eyes on the photograph. "Small world," I said. He turned slowly, like he'd already known I was there. His expression was unreadable again, same as that night, but there was something different underneath it this time. Something that took him a half-second longer to put away. "You took this," he said. It wasn't a question. "I did." He looked back at the photo. "You didn't know it was me." Not until tonight. A short silence settled between us. Not uncomfortable, exactly, but weighted. Then he said, quietly, "You made me look lonely." I didn't answer right away, because the honest answer was that I hadn't made him look like anything. I'd just pointed the camera at what was already there. He didn't leave right away. That was the part I kept thinking about afterward. A man like Tate Mercer, and I knew who he was by then. Dana had whispered his full name in my ear with wide eyes about 30 seconds after I walked away from him. A man like that had no real reason to stay at a small neighborhood gallery on a Wednesday night. And yet he did. He moved through the rest of the show slowly, stopping at other people's work, holding his wine glass without drinking much from it. I tried not to watch him. I mostly failed. Dana appeared at my elbow at some point and said, very quietly, "Do you know him?" "We've met once," I said, briefly. She looked at me the way she looks at me when she knows I'm leaving something out, but she let it go. A little later, when the crowd had thinned and I was starting to think about how to politely exit my own show, Tate came back. He stopped beside me again, same as before, comfortable with silence in a way that most people aren't. "The other two are good," he said, "but that one is different." He meant still. I nodded. It was an accident, almost. I wasn't planning to shoot that night. "The unplanned ones usually are," he said. Then he looked at me directly, not at the photo, and added, "I'd like to buy it." I felt something shift in my chest, and not in a good way. It was a reflex, immediate and familiar, the instinct to locate the angle, the thing underneath the offer. With my ex, generosity had always come attached to something, a favor owed, a dynamic established. I knew it wasn't fair to apply that logic to a stranger. I did it anyway. "It's not for sale," I said. He didn't flinch, didn't push, just held my gaze for a moment and said, "Okay." That one word again, same as the night of the accident. Simple, clean, no argument. I wasn't sure if it made me trust him slightly more or slightly less. He left about 10 minutes later. No dramatic exit, no lingering goodbye. He set his glass down, put on his coat, and on his way out paused just long enough to say, "Good show, Zoe." First time he'd used my name. I stood there after he was gone, telling myself the warmth I felt was just the room and the wine and the relief of the night being almost over. But that night, back in my apartment, I stood in front of my laptop longer than necessary before I typed his name into the search bar. What came up wasn't surprising. Old money, real estate, the kind of family that has a Wikipedia page. What surprised me was the photo, a shot from some charity event 2 years back. He was standing slightly apart from the group, hands in his pockets, not quite smiling, and I recognized the expression immediately. It was the same one from Still, the same one I'd photographed without knowing who he was. I closed the laptop, but I didn't stop thinking about it. 3 days passed, and I didn't hear from him, which was fine, normal, expected even. We'd exchanged information for insurance purposes, not for anything else, and the gallery had been a coincidence that neither of us had planned. I went back to my regular rhythm, morning shoots, afternoon editing, the occasional freelance job that paid well enough to justify the chaos of hauling equipment across the city. I had a good week, technically. 2 clients, decent light both days, no equipment failures. And still, somewhere underneath all of it, I kept catching myself replaying that moment at the gallery. The way he'd said my name. The way he hadn't pushed when I said no. I didn't know what to do with a man who accepted no that easily. Part of me appreciated it. Another part, the part I wasn't proud of, wondered if it meant he simply didn't care enough to try. On Thursday, I got an email. Clean, direct, no unnecessary pleasantries. It was from the Mercer Group's communications office, which already made me sit up straighter. They were preparing a feature on a restored property in the West Village, a landmark building that had been in the family for decades, and they were looking for a photographer to document the interior before and after final staging. The budget listed was generous, more than generous, the kind of number that would cover 2 months of rent without touching my savings. I read it 3 times. Then I sat back and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. It could have been a coincidence. People in his world moved through the same small circles, and my name had been on the gallery wall 3 nights ago. A referral wasn't impossible. But I knew, with a quiet certainty I couldn't entirely explain, that this had Tate Mercer's fingerprints on it. And that was exactly the problem. I thought about my ex, the apartment he'd offered to help me find, the contacts he'd offered to introduce me to, the way every gesture of generosity had quietly rearranged the balance between us, until I owed him something I'd never agreed to. I didn't want to go back to that. I also didn't want to be the kind of person who turned down real work because of a feeling I couldn't prove. I called Dana. She listened without interrupting, which meant she already had an opinion. When I finished, she said, "Take the job, Zoe. Invoice them like any other client. If he shows up and makes it weird, you leave. It's not that simple." "It actually is," she said. "You're making it complicated because you're already thinking about him more than you want to admit." I didn't argue. She wasn't wrong. I sent the confirmation email that evening. Professional, brief, no mention of having met the owner. 2 days later, I showed up at the address they'd sent. A beautiful pre-war building on a quiet street, morning light falling across the stone facade in exactly the way I would have hoped. I was early. I was always early. I stood outside for a moment, camera bag on my shoulder, telling myself this was just a job. Then the front door opened from the inside, and Tate Mercer was standing there, looking at me like he'd known exactly when I'd arrive. He didn't pretend to be surprised to see me. I respected that, even if it annoyed me. He held the door open and said good morning in a tone that was perfectly neutral, like we were colleagues who ran into each other regularly and had long since stopped making it mean anything. I walked past him into the building and immediately understood why the shoot was worth the rate they'd offered. The entrance hall alone had original mosaic floors, plaster crown molding, tall windows that caught the morning light and scattered it across every surface. I stopped without meaning to. "It's something," he said from behind me. "It is," I said. I set my bag down and started pulling out equipment, and he stayed near the door, hands in his pockets, not hovering but not leaving either. After a minute, I looked up and asked, directly, "Were you planning to stay?" He considered the question with the same unhurried quality he seemed to bring to everything. "I have a meeting here at 11. I came early." "How convenient," I said. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. "Do you want me to leave?" I thought about it, honestly. The sensible answer was yes. Cleaner, simpler, no distractions. But the building was large, the morning was long, and standing here arguing about it was already wasting light. "Just don't get in my shots," I said. He nodded once and moved toward the far end of the hall, giving me space without being asked twice. I started working. That's the thing about being behind a camera. It gives you permission to look at things directly. At angles, at light, at the way a room holds itself. And occasionally, unavoidably, at the person standing quietly in the corner of it. Tate didn't perform. That was what I noticed first. Most people, when there's a camera in the room, adjust, straighten up, become slightly more aware of themselves. He didn't. He read something on his phone, walked slowly through the adjoining room, paused at the window the same way he'd paused at my photograph. Like he was genuinely somewhere inside his own thoughts and had no particular interest in managing how that looked from the outside. It was disarming in a way I hadn't expected. Around 9:30, he disappeared for a while and came back with 2 coffees in paper cups, setting one on the windowsill near where I was working without making a production of it. I almost said I didn't need it. Instead, I just said thank you, and he said nothing. And we stayed in that quiet for a few minutes that felt oddly comfortable. Then he said, without looking at me, "You didn't ask if I sent your name to the office." I lowered my camera. I didn't need to. He turned then and looked at me with something that was almost frank. "And you still came." "It's a good job," I said. "That's all." He held my gaze for a moment, and something passed through his expression that I couldn't quite read. Not satisfaction exactly, something more complicated than that. He picked up his coffee and said, "Right." But the way he said it made it sound like he didn't believe me at all. The worst part was that I wasn't entirely sure he was wrong. The shoot ran longer than I planned. Not because anything went wrong. The light stayed good, the building kept revealing details I hadn't noticed at first, and I lost track of time the way I only do when I'm genuinely absorbed in something. By the time I packed up, it was past noon, and the entrance hall had filled with soft, flat light that was less interesting to photograph, but somehow more comfortable to stand in. Tate's 11 o'clock meeting had come and gone. 2 men in suits, brief, businesslike. He'd moved through it efficiently and without warmth, and watching him in that mode was its own kind of revelation. The ease with which he shifted registers, the way authority sat on him without effort. When they left, he came back to where I was reviewing shots on my camera screen, and for a few minutes we stood side by side without talking, which by now felt less strange than it probably should have. "Anything usable?" he asked. "More than I expected," I said. He nodded, looking at the room rather than at me. Then, after a pause that felt deliberate, he said, Have lunch with me. Not a question. Not quite a demand either. Something in between. The kind of ask that assumed yes without pressuring it. I felt the pull of it immediately, and that was exactly why I said no. I have an afternoon client, I told him, which was true. He accepted it the same way he always accepted things, quietly, without argument. I gathered my bag, and he walked me to the door, and when I stepped outside into the cold air, I felt the conversation closing behind me, like a door easing shut. I was halfway down the block when my phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number that I somehow already knew. It said only, "Same time Thursday. Second floor hasn't been documented yet." I stopped walking, read it twice. The job was real, I knew that. The building needed the work, and the invoice would clear like any other, but standing on that sidewalk in the cold, I also knew that Thursday had nothing to do with photography anymore. And I was going anyway. That's it for part 1 of this story. Part 2 is coming very soon, and trust me, things are about to get a lot more complicated between Zoe and Tate. If you enjoyed this, drop a number from 1 to 10 in the comments and let me know how you're feeling about these two. Your support is what makes it possible to keep these stories coming. Thank you so much for being here. It genuinely means everything.